3 Drops of Blood by Sadegh Hedayat. Translated and read for you by Clay Catlin. One day has passed since they transferred me to a different room. Can it be that things are as the administrator promised? That now I've been fully rehabilitated and in another week I'll be discharged? Haven't I been doing well? 1 year has passed. During this whole period, whenever I pleaded and whined that I needed a paper and pencil, they never gave them to me. I always told myself at all hours of the day that if I could only grasp a pencil and paper in my hand, I would write down all manner of things. But yesterday, without even me having asked, they brought them to me. Those things that I wanted so badly, those things that I begged and begged so persistently for. But what's the use? Even now I scour my brain for something to write, but I can't think of a single sentence. It's like someone has seized my hand, or as if my arm has suddenly become insensate. Now that I focus my eyes between the tangled, confusing lines that I've scrawled across the page, the only words that are readable are these: 3 drops of blood. The cerulean sky, the verdant miniature garden, the blooming buds upon the hill, and the placid breeze bringing the scent of the blossoms into my room. But what's the use? I can't derive the least bit of pleasure from these things. All of it is merely fluff for poetry, and it's fine enough for children, and for those that are doomed to remain only children throughout their entire lives. 1 year has passed since I came to this place. From dusk to dawn, I'm kept awake by the noises of a cat. Its horrifying screeches and scratchy warbles frustrate me so bitterly that I feel my very soul slipping away from my body. When morning comes, I've hardly opened my eyes when the thoughtless injection comes. What dreary days and horrid hours I've passed in this place. In summer, we congregate in a dingy cellar, wearing yellow shirts and pants, and in winter, we loiter beneath the sun near the front of the miniature garden. 1 year has passed while I've been living among these bizarre and unfortunate people. There is no fellowship whatsoever between me and them. The differences between us are like those between the earth and the sky, but their plaintive wails, their strange silences, their foul babbling, their wretched sobs, and their mad cackles will plague my sleeping hours with nightmares forever. An hour still remains until we eat our dinner. The printed menu describes the same typical meal: yogurt soup, rice pudding, plain rice, bread, and cheese. Just enough food to keep us from starving to death. All Hassan hopes for is a pot of onion soup with 4 pieces of leavened sengak bread. When he's released, instead of pen and paper, they should give him onion soup. He's one of the more fortunate people in here, with his stocky body, idiot laugh, thuggish neck, bald head, and rough hands, as if he was made for hauling bricks. Indeed, every atom of his being testified that this was his life's purpose. His moronic features alone screamed it out loud. If Muhammad Ali was not with us at lunch and dinner, Hassan would probably have sent us all to meet our maker. But Muhammad Ali himself is also a citizen of this strange world. You people can say whatever you want, but this world exists beyond the normal realm of humanity. One of our doctors here, God preserve him, just hasn't got a clue. If I were in his shoes, one night I would mix poison in with the dinner and serve it to the patients. And the next morning I would stand in the garden with my hands on my waist and watch the corpses being carried away. When they first brought me here, I was convinced that they were trying to poison me. I wouldn't so much as touch lunch or dinner unless Muhammad Ali had tasted it, and only then would I eat. At night, strange fears would creep up on me as I slept, and would make me quake and quiver. All these things have become so distant and blurred now. Always the same people, the same things to eat, the same blue-painted rooms that become navy halfway up the wall. 10 months ago, a lunatic they had placed in the depths of the yard tore his own guts open with a ceramic shard, pulled his intestines out of his body, and played with them. They said that he had been a butcher, and thus was used to tearing guts open. But there was another nutcase who pierced his own eyeball with his fingernail. They had tied his hands behind his back while he screamed, and the blood dried onto his gouged socket. I know the blame for all these horrible things rests on the shoulder of the administrator. The people here aren't all this way, though. Even the many of them that can be fully rehabilitated and discharged will be ill-fated, like this woman, Solgra Sultan, who was in the women's ward. She has tried to escape 2 or 3 times, but they apprehended her. She is an old woman, but she rubs chalk from the wall plaster on her face and rouges it with geranium petals. Solgra Sultan thinks that she's a 14-year-old girl. If she were fully rehabilitated and looked into a mirror, she'd have a stroke. Worse than all is our Taghi, who wants to turn the world upside down and, despite believing that women are the cause of all men's misfortune, and for the sake of society all things female should be killed, has fallen in love with this same Solgra Sultan. The blame for all these things lays on the head of our administrator. He out-crazies all the lunatics here. A man with a bulbous nose and the shifty eyes of an opium smoker. He patrols beneath the tall pine at the rear of the garden. Occasionally he bends down to inspect the foot of the pine. If an unsuspecting person were to see him, they'd say, "What a poor harmless man to have found himself here among the lunatics." But I know him, and I know that beneath this pine tree 3 drops of blood stain the dirt. He has a cage hanging under his window. The cage is empty because a cat snatched his canary, but he left it there to lure cats inside and kill them. Since yesterday, he has been stalking a piebald cat. As soon as the animal scampered up the tree in front of his window, he told the guard at the door to shoot it. These 3 drops of blood belong to the cat, but if anyone asks the administrator, he says they were coughed up by the ill-omened bird of truth, the thieving scope cell. In this bizarre place, there is my friend and neighbor Abbas. 2 weeks haven't even passed since they brought him here. He took to me warmly. He thinks of himself as a prophet or poet. He says that all matters, especially those of prophets, are tied to fortune and luck. Anyone who is blessed with great luck, especially if they are profoundly stupid, will turn out all right. And anyone who is unlucky, even if they are the great mind of the times, will end up as miserably as Abbas. Abbas imagines that he plays the tar quite well. He has stretched some wires across a wooden board and believes that he has created a tar himself. 8 times a day he sings me a poem he has written. Perhaps this same poem is why they brought him to this place. You could call it a poem, or perhaps a strange song. Evening has fallen once again, alack, the whole of the world is dyed pitch black. For all creatures the time has come for repose, besides me with my growing sorrows and woes. Joy must not exist on this plain, death is the sole cure for my pain, but beneath the pine in the courtyard's mud, the dirt is stained with 3 drops of blood. One day has passed since we went on a stroll in the garden. Abbas was reciting that same poem when a woman, a man, and a young girl approached us. So far they had come to visit Abbas on 5 occasions. I had seen them before and recognized them. The young girl had brought a handful of flowers. The girl smiled at me. It was clear that she liked me. In fact, she had come just to see me. After all, the pock-marked face of Abbas was far from pleasant. But while the older women talked to the doctor, Abbas drew the young girl close and planted a kiss on her. 1 year has passed, and nobody has come to see me or bring me flowers. The last time it had been Siavosh who had come to see me. Siavosh was my best friend. We had been neighbors and would walk to and from our college together every day. We always talked over our lessons with each other, and I had been teaching him how to play the tar for fun. Rokhsareh, Siavosh's cousin, was my fiancée. She would often come visit us. Siavosh had designs of ending up with her sister. As it happened, 1 month before our engagement party, Siavosh became unwell and was sent away. Once or twice I came to ask after him, but they always told me that the rules forbade me from speaking to him. Though I insisted, they always gave me the same answer. Eventually I gave up. I clearly remember returning to my home at twilight one day, in the period right before exam season. I spread my books and papers across the table, and as soon as I began to change my clothes, the sound of a gunshot echoed through my house. The noise sounded so near that it made my blood chill, as our house lay behind a ravine and there had been a wave of robberies in the area. I grabbed my revolver from inside a drawer and came out to the yard. I stood there for a moment, listening, before climbing the ladder up to the roof, but I couldn't see a thing. As I descended, I peered into Siavosh's compound. I saw Siavosh in just his pajamas, standing in the middle of the yard. Startled, I asked, "Is that you, Siavosh?" He noticed me and replied, "Come here. I'm the only one home." "Did you hear the gunshot?" He brought a finger to his mouth and motioned me over with his head. I hastily scrambled down and rapped at the gate of his compound. He let me in himself. Keeping his head averted in a peculiar way and staring sulkily at the ground, he asked, "Why haven't you come to see me?" "I've tried. I came to ask after you 2 or 3 times, but they said the doctor forbade it. They think I'm unwell, but they're mistaken." I asked him twice more if he'd heard the gunshot. Without answering me, he grabbed my hand and led me to the foot of the pine to show me something. I peered closely. 3 drops of fresh blood stained the ground. Afterwards, he brought me to his room, shut all the doors, sat down in a chair, and turned on a lamp. I sat down and he pulled his chair up to face me. His room was decorated sparsely. It was painted blue, but turned navy halfway up the wall. A tar had been placed in one corner. Several bound books and school papers had been strewn across the table's surface. Siavosh reached into a drawer and pulled out a revolver, which he showed off to me. It was one of those beautiful old-fashioned six-shooters with a pearl inlay. He shoved it into his pants pocket and began. I used to have a female cat. Her name was Foxy. Perhaps you've seen her before. She was one of those typical piebald cats, though with two bulging eyes like those of a woman with coal-streaked lids. She had a pattern on her back like someone had spilled ink over a steel gray sheet of blotting paper and then had folded it down the middle. When I'd get home on school days, she would dart straight towards me, meow, and rub herself against me. When I sat down, she would climb atop my head and shoulders and nuzzle her nose against my face. With her bristly tongue, she'd lick my forehead until I kissed her. It's said that female cats are more deceitful, more affectionate, more sentient than tomcats. Besides me, she took a powerful liking to the cook, as that was where her food came from. But as for the old maid of the house, Kiabia, who often prayed and disliked cat hair, she kept her distance. Foxy probably imagined that humans were much shrewder than cats, and that they had hoarded all the delicious food and cozy places for themselves, while cats had to flatter and fawn so sycophantically just to get a pittance from them. The only time her primal instincts awoke and boiled over was when she would get the bloody head of a rooster in her claws. She would then transform into a predatory beast. Her eyes would be electrified with brutality. She would bare her claws, and if anyone came near her, they would be met with threatening snarls. Afterwards, as if she had deceived even herself, she would begin to play. With all the powers of her imagination, she would pretend the rooster's head was a real living animal, pinning it beneath her paws, glaring at it menacingly, spying on it, lying in wait to pounce on it, swatting at it twice, and then, little by little, with leaps and lunges, attacks and dodges, she would reveal all the innate dexterity and agility of her species. After tiring of this display of force, she gnawed on the bloodied head with more and more of an appetite, and for several minutes afterwards prowled around the remnants of it, not letting anyone get near her. For 1 or 2 hours after that, she forgot all the artificial sophistication she'd assumed, not letting a soul approach, not rubbing up against anyone, not reducing herself to flattery at all. Actually, even when expressing friendship and affection, she remained wild and aloof, never revealing the secrets of her life. She thought that the house belonged to her, and if an unfamiliar cat found itself nearby, especially a female cat, she would fly into a rage, hissing and wailing for hours. The sounds that Foxy would produce at lunchtime and the noise she made to flatter someone were quite different. Her cries of hunger, the yelps she let loose in scuffles, the lust-drunk mewls when she was in heat, were all distinct from one another. The tone and lilt of each would change. The first was a heart-scratching cry, the second a yowl of abject hatred, the third a painful wail that was pulled from her by the natural order that demanded she seek out a mate. But the most meaningful thing about Foxy were her expressions. Sometimes she would display a near-human sensitivity that made one ask themselves, in the back of that fuzzy head, beneath those secretive green eyes, what thoughts and feelings flowed. It was spring of last year when it happened, when something horrible occurred. As I'm sure you know, in that season, all creatures become intoxicated with lust and couple up. It's as if the springtime wind blows a breath of madness into all living things. A wave of this witchery got a hold of our Foxy once, and, like an earthquake, sent her whole body trembling. She would wail morosely. The tomcats heard her wails and would gather around our compound to answer. After fights and scuffles among the suitors, Foxy chose from their ranks the most powerful and full-voiced tom to be her mate. In animal courtship, scent has a great deal of special significance. That is why pampered, prim house toms hold no attraction for females. On the other hand, alley cats that prowl on brick walls, thieving, gaunt, vagabond, starving toms, whose very flesh emits the primordial stink of their species, these are the cats that attract females. All night long, Foxy and her mate sang their love aloud. Foxy's supple, slender body stretched and quivered back and forth, and her tom's body behind her curved like a taut bow, while both let out wails of pleasure. They kept at it until the break of dawn. At that time, Foxy would return home with tangled hair, tired and spent, but aglow with satisfaction. Foxy's copulation kept me from sleeping at night, and eventually drove me into a wild rage. One day I was working in front of the open window. I saw them, the lover and her beloved, swaggering around in the small garden. With this same revolver you see now, I aimed at them from 3 steps away. I fired the revolver and shot Foxy's mate. It seemed to shatter his back. He made one great leap and, without even making a noise or letting out a cry, darted through the alley, plummeted into the walled garden, and died. Bloodstains blotted his path. Foxy eyed him confusedly for a moment before she noticed his paw prints. She sniffed his spilled blood and went to his dead body. For 2 days and 2 nights she held vigil over her dead lover. You'd see her tap him with her paw, as if she was saying to him, "Wake up! Spring has sprung. Why do you sleep when it's the time for love? Why aren't you moving? Get up. Please get up." After all, Foxy had no concept of death, and did not realize that her lover was no more. The next day, Foxy and her mate's corpse vanished. I searched everywhere. I asked everyone, but it was in vain. Was Foxy angry with me? Was she dead? Had she gone off to mate with another? If so, what had become of the corpse of her first love? One night I heard the sound of the same tom mewing. It echoed until morning. The same thing occurred on the following night, but again the sound faded away by morning. The third night I drew my revolver, and with an empty mind fired into the same pine that stands in front of my window. The tom's eyes flashed in the darkness. He let out a long screech, and the noise stopped. In the morning, 3 drops of blood stained the foot of the pine. Every night since then, he comes and let loose that same awful screech. The others sleep like the dead. They don't hear it. Every time I tell them what I'm telling you, they laugh at me. But I know with complete certainty, that this voice belongs to the cat I killed. Every night since then, sleep does not come to my weary eyes. Wherever I go, whichever room I go to bed in, all night long this cruel ghostly cat wails with his horrid throaty voice, crying out for his lost mate. Today the house is empty, so I came to the place where the cat sits and shrieks each night and took aim. I know where he sits. I can still picture his eyes lighting up in the darkness that night. When I pulled the trigger, I heard the wails of the tom, and 3 drops of blood dripped down from above. You saw it with your own eyes. Aren't you my witness? Right then, the door of the room was open, and Rochsareh and her mother stepped in. Rochsareh had a handful of flowers in her hand. I stood up to greet her, but Siavosh cut in with a strange smile. Rising, he said, "Of course, you all know Mirza Ahmed Khan better than you know me. There's no need for introductions. He can testify that he saw the 3 drops of blood at the foot of the pine tree with his own eyes." "Yes, I've seen them." Siavosh stepped forward, laughing like a child, and pulled my 6-shooter out of my pocket. He placed it down on the table and said, "You know that Mirza Ahmed Khan plays the tar quite well and is a wonderful poet. He is also a capable hunter. In fact, he's a dead-eye marksman." Then he gestured to me. I stood up and said, "Yes, this evening I came by to get some school papers from Siavosh. To entertain ourselves, we took shots at the pine tree for a while. But those 3 drops of blood don't belong to the cat. They belong to the bird of truth. I'm sure you know the old tale about how the bird of truth stole 3 wheat stalks from a child. Now it cries out every night until 3 drops of blood drip from its throat, revealing its crime. Or maybe a cat had snatched the neighbor's canary and was shot, leaving the blood in its wake as it ran away. Hold on a second. I have a new song which I'll sing for you." I grabbed my tar, tuned it, and sang these lines. "Evening has fallen once again, alack, the whole of the world is dyed pitch black. For all creatures the time has come for repose, besides me with my growing sorrows and woes. It seems joy does not exist on this plain. Death is the sole cure for my pain. But beneath the pine, in the courtyard's mud, the dirt is stained with 3 drops of blood." When the song reached this point, Rochsareh's mother left the room in a befouled mood. Rochsareh raised her eyebrows and said, "He's crazy." Then she took Siavosh's hand, and giggling, they stepped through the door and closed it behind them. From behind the glass window pane, I saw them enter the yard. Beneath the lamplight, they embraced each other and kissed. Hello there, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this reading of 3 Drops of Blood by the late, great Iranian writer Sadegh Hedayat. It's a lot of fun to translate and to record. As you might know, Sadegh Hedayat was born in 1903 in Tehran and sadly ended his own life in 1951 in Paris. This story is, I believe, from 1932 and was published in a collection that was also called 3 Drops of Blood. It's a really great story. I sort of consider it Sadegh Hedayat at some of his best work. It's really creepy, moody, has this sort of fever dream quality with these symbols that keep repeating themselves over and over again. I think we can also see it as a precursor to the novel that's considered his masterpiece, The Blind Owl, which he would publish 4 years later. But yeah, this was a lot of fun to do. I have translated another one of Sadegh Hedayat's stories, Tarikhane, The Dark Room, And I might do a recording for that as well, if I feel like it. If you want to read a print version of this, or an online version of this in print form, this translation was published in the University of Chicago's Middle Eastern Studies Center's journal, Lights. So I will put a link to the copy of that journal in the description. And yeah, once again, thank you for listening. And let me know if you'd like to hear another of Sadegh Hedayat's stories. I might record one. Take care.